Well, hello and welcome to this training session. It's designed for support people, and today we're going to be thinking about solving issues around CRM licenses. And it's really for colleagues, Sage partners, and I'll be also making this available on the through the e-learning platform and the YouTube channel, so that anyone who has an interest in making sure that their licensing issues within Sage CRM are resolved. Now, as we go through the materials, we always have to think about what are the resources and documentations that are available to help you learn. Well, of course, the starting point is always going to be the Sage CRM Help Center. I'm always surprised that when I'm looking at the analytics, that the Help Center has not yet crossed the line. People are still relying more on people are more inclined to go to the community or Sage City rather than they are to the Help Center. And I think the Help Center is the main place where you should always go to look for helpful documentation to explain things. The materials that we're talking about today are all going to be up on the Sage CRM playlist within inside the Sage Support and Training YouTube channel. So it's always good to be able to go to, as you can see here, youtube.com/user/Sage Software NA, or search for Sage Customer Support and Training. And you'll find lots and lots of Sage CRM videos. We're currently adding them around about 2 a month. And what we're going to be looking at now are a series of materials that we will add to that. There are a few which are talking about a few videos already up on the site which do talk about licensing. But in our lesson today, we're going to cover really 4 different areas. And I hope that this is these are the topics that you're interested in. What we'll do at the end of the presentation, and please, if you're watching this on YouTube sometime later in the future, this is really a presentation that was recorded in the context of some colleague training, and I'll go on to Q&As at the end of the presentation. So the first thing to look at, we'll look at commercial matters, updating the license, issues that happen after installation, and licensing and development. We'll look at each of these points in turn. But the first thing to bear in mind are the commercial realities of what we're doing with a license. Now, the responsibility of Sage CRM in terms of how it's sold is down to each Sage OpCo or territory. So although Sage CRM is a globally sold product, how it's sold is down to each individual territory. So there's some variance in the way in which licensing is approached around the world. Technically, I'm going to be explaining things technically how it works. But when it comes to availability of licensing for testing, development, training, backup, these are all local issues that have to be considered as commercial decisions. And so things like perpetual version versus subscription licensing, they're all things to talk about with the local operating company, and even the availability of named licenses versus concurrent licenses are also down to the local OpCo. And you start to get real commercial questions impacting us if we consider something like self-service. This diagram happens to show self-service split over different servers. So 2 installs of Sage CRM that might be needed to allow for a self-service site to be housed on a web server beyond a corporate firewall, for example. But that type of licensing consideration is a commercial matter rather than a technical matter. So that's where the local operating company, whether you're in North America, whether you're in Asia, for example, you actually have to consider whether a particular technical architecture is feasible because of the commercial decisions that are made. So you have to be discussed with the local Sage team. That's probably enough I want to talk about on the commercial matters. If we think about the updating of the license now, what are the reasons why anyone sort of want to make a change to their license? Well, there are a number of reasons why and how you come to reinstalling CRM as a general topic. So after you installed Sage CRM at some point, a customer has installed Sage CRM at some point, there's likely to be a need to make changes to settings. And these aren't the everyday administrative changes that you and I might make. They're not things like changing a security profile or adding a new team. These are big changes. So where you may want to reinstall the database, typically that's only done when you're working with a training or a test server. Then you may want to reinstall and go through a reinstallation process because you suddenly realize you need to work with self-service, and that might be within the second or third phase of a project. You might want to look at what you've got in terms of, you might suspect that some registry settings are wrong, so you might need to do this after restoring a backup or a machine that has a different instance of Sage CRM. If you've got on a development server, if you imagine you've had multiple instances of Sage CRM installed at some point and you want to actually take a clean slate on the particular install that you're working on. And you may also want to reinstall program files and reset iOS aliases, and typically they're going to be on other matters that support colleagues may direct you to, or advice because of something like Tomcat settings, for example. You may want to ensure that you've got the latest program files, or you may want to ensure that the web server is set correctly. The most likely reason, though, that anyone comes to run the reinstallation shield is because of a customer's usage of the system expands, and therefore they need to change their licensing. And we've got a need then to try and change the license key. And there's really two ways of approaching this within the product. This particular screen that I'm showing you here is showing where you can find the license key details of your current install. So if you're wondering what you've got in terms of your license key, this is actually one of the most important places to go. You go into administration system, license key details, and you look down. This is where you will see the details of the license key, and it's quite interesting to leap out and see what you've got in here. So you can see, for me, this might be one area that you'd see. We've got a logged on license system. That's I'm allowing for concurrent licensing. If you look, I've got both a developer license and what's called the extensibility license, or the EIS license, Enterprise Integration Server license. You can see as well here in my license, I've got distributed. Now that's an immediate thing to go out and say, what's distributed? Why have you got this? And that is where you want to be able to work with multi-server CRM. So if you're working in an environment where you need to install CRM on multiple web servers to allow for the load balancing, or where you've got a lot of users, that's the sort of thing that you would see within the license. But you don't want it it's the type of thing that I'll mention a little bit later on. But you look at that, you have to be aware of the license key details and what's in there, because license keys, if they're regenerated, elements may slip into them that either you want or you don't want, and you should be aware of what your license key contains. So a license key is held in two locations. You can't change it through this screen. The license key is held inside the Windows registry and inside the system parameter table. So first of all, if we have a look at the registry, you can see that the license key details are found in the registry, and they're found underneath where you've got the computer, the H key, local key, software, into the WOW 6432 node, eware config, and then the instance name. So this is where you can come down and find where our license key details are. And you can see there, I've got this license key on my machine ending in 1U5T3. And this license key is matched then inside the system parameters table. You can see the way in which you can look at this is inside the database of Sage CRM within the metadata, and you can go and look inside the custom sysparams table I've opened up here. Obviously my SQL Server Management Studio, and I've gone and looked for that. So you can look at where the license key is held, but just about the worst thing that you can do is to ever try and manually update the registry or the database. Down that path lies weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do not make direct changes to the registry or custom sysparams table. It's worse than running with scissors. It is not a good way of handling the license keys changes. So there are two safe ways that you can do this, and there are two safe ways. So the first is to rerun the installation program. So that's a setup.exe that comes with CRM. So you can then select the option to change existing install of Sage CRM, and then you can see here you're getting a list of components, and what you would want to do is to select the license key checkbox. So make sure that you back up before you do this, and make sure that no users are logged on into the system, because obviously if you're changing the license key, what happens is that everything shuts down. You have to do a restart of IIS, and that is going to really throw everybody out of the system. So you do not want people working in the system when you do this. So it's a question of entering a license key and overwriting your existing license, and the install of Sage CRM will then update as the rest of the installation program makes the changes to the registry and also into the database. So that's a good way of doing it, but actually the safest way, the best and safest way, is to use a second method, which uses the dedicated license key update utility. And this is what we can start to find here. So you can find the utility, the license key update utility, underneath program files, 86, Sage CRM, and then whatever your instance name is, where you've installed it. Mine is, I always keep it to CRM, and then you got down to license key update. And when you can run that, you can run that, and what you get, and again, if you're running the license key update, make sure that you have fully backed up the instance of Sage CRM and that no users are logged on into the system before you do this. So select the install name that you need to change the license keys, and you'll get as you can see here, a box to enter the new license keys. You enter the license key that you're working with, and then it's a question of clicking on the next button once it's done. And so that's the safest way of updating the license, and probably represents one of the most standard tasks that anyone can do, and carries the lowest risk of making any changes to the instance of Sage CRM. So that is the way to do it. That's always through that way. So let's assume that we've installed Sage CRM. Let's assume that that we've updated our license. Do we get problems that occur after installation? Well, probably yes. Yeah, we're going to do that, and I suspect that people have seen this message. You are using an unregistered version of Sage CRM, please register your Sage CRM software. So each license key is tied to a, we have a license key server. We configure that license key, and there's a registration of the license key that indicates that a license key can be installed a certain number of times. The default number of times a license can be installed is 5 times. And from a development perspective, remember this is a development perspective, not the commercial perspective. We can imagine that somebody may want to use a license key for a development server, a test server, a training server, and perhaps their live production server. And you have to have the relevant commercial agreements in place to do all of that sort of thing. But if you reinstall repeatedly, you're likely to exceed the number of installs associated with a license key before you, and therefore you'd see this message. Now, why this happens is also down to the fact that we have to understand what's going on. When Sage CRM starts up, it's making a call to a license key validation server. And that license key validation server, and let's have a look at that now, is going off to product registration.sagecrm.com license validator. So it's attempting to call this point. If you're finding yourself with that error message, go and have a look at the logs. And what you'll see is that there is an attempted transmission of license key information to the registration server. And so it understands you have this registration. It's trying to get to the license validator, but you will see an error in the logs. Now, in this case, you'll notice that there's an error code 400, and it comes up with an error connection to Webservice registration, keygen, proper registration, keygen cannot be found. So here, this indicates that the request is somehow incorrect or corrupted, and the server can't understand it. And there's a number of reasons why that might be. There's some things which are under the control of the customer or the partner. So there might be questions of proxy between the Sage CRM server and the network, or there may be a timeout issue on the network that it's happening. Or it may actually be because the registration server is down. And that's something that we have noticed internally within Sage, that occasionally that server does go down. So if you're a support colleague, then do escalate that and identify that if you're convinced that the number of license keys, the number of registrations are true, and you know that it's correctly registered, the license key. I have not covered the manual registration mechanism because that's actually pretty well easily documented and followed as to what you can do to do a manual registration of the license key. This is when you have the suddenly the message appearing when previously it's been working fine. Let's step on to the next topic, which is we've got another message, which is a pretty scary message, which occurs. A number of named users need to be disabled to enable the system license. And so this type of message is typically encountered when a partner, very first time they change Sage CRM, whether they install Sage CRM. It's a very common one when you first install Sage CRM, or when you install a demo or a development system, reinstall it, and you've been given a key by support, and the key doesn't match the number of users that are actually in the system. So it's very common, for example, that if for testing purposes, the development team will use a 3-user license. That free user license should be a concurrent user. But if everyone is named in the system, then you'll get into a problem there immediately. So this is the type of circumstances that this occurs in is if you have a license key that is for 10 named users, but if you reinstall, for example, Sage CRM and put the demo data in place, then you might have 10 named users. So you have 18 named users in place, and that would be blown out of the water in that case. And recovery in that case is you have to actually go into the database and you have to change the users table. So if there's ever a mismatch on that, so this is when you can go in and what I've done here with this little statement, update users, set user resource to be true where user ID is not equal to 1. This is setting everybody to be a resource user, much like a disabled user, as resources and disabled users don't consume a license. So they don't consume a license. So that would allow the system administrator to log on to the system and then selectively re-enable the users that they need to be log-on users. So people who are not disabled or not resource users. And we can develop this idea a little bit further. By looking at license key mismatches that may occur. Now, license key mismatches are, it's an interesting sort of idea, really. We might find ourselves working with a situation where we find features just go missing, which is a bit distressing, really, that a feature goes missing. But what sort of thing that this might be is where you've upgraded the system and there's a new license that has been applied, but the feature list, do you remember that first screen that I showed you, which listed all the different a load of different options within a license key? If there's a difference between the old license key and the new license key, when the new license doesn't match the previous features. And this can be confusing or distressing for a customer in equal amounts. And here you can see, and in this particular case, I have applied a correct key that I've got self-service enabled. So my self-service menu options are listed here. But if I had, for example, previously had self-service installed and operating, but I had an upgrade key which missed out self-service as an option, then I might find myself, this tab would disappear. And equally, there could be other reasons for missing tabs or for generated errors where you apply a customization. For example, apply a component that contains a set of customizations that install changes that change the menu. But you can't rule out the possibility that if somebody says a feature has disappeared from them, you have to go and look at see whether their license is correct. So, for example, they might suddenly see they don't have the ability to do work with service requests or cases, and it's make sure that they've got cases in their license. Now that brings us on to, I'm approaching the sort of the fourth area that I wanted to talk about now, which is this idea of licensing and development. And if we're into customization here, we can think about, first of all, sort of interaction with CRM through web services. And I'm specifically thinking here about the SOAP web services as an example. And why I want to talk about licenses and development is you might have concurrent users in your system, and you know that there's a limit with the number of users who can log on if you've got a concurrent users count of 10, for example, only 10 users can log on at the same time. But what if you're working with web services? Could that cause a potential conflict with other users accessing Sage CRM if a web service-based application is attempting to do that? So basically, does a web service request consume a concurrent license? Well, actually, the answer is no. It's really good. The SOAP web service logon is an additional logon. So this is a no problem scenario, but it's important to understand why that's the case. So if you have a look at this diagram, you can see here what I've done is I've opened up, and you can look at the screenshot and look at the top. Do you see I've got labeled tabs there for System Administrator Kylie Ward, Susan May, and then I've got another one which seems to be a fourth tab, which is just telling me that I'm going to my logon screen. And then I've got this fifth tab, which is listing out the connections. I got to this particular page by using a localhost install name, path, I should say, server, install name, eware-dll system admin. So you may not have known about that particular path, but this allows us to see who's logged on into the system, what sessions are open. And you'll notice that I've got 2 system administrator sessions shown here. And this is a very good way of seeing what's going on. So I've got 3 concurrent users. My license allows for 3 concurrent users. My fourth tab is showing me that I tried to log on. I actually tried to log on as a user called Matthew Ebden, but I got the classic message, maximum number of users already logged on. Please contact your system administrator. So by looking at this, I was able to see that. Now, what I was able to do, though, was to use a web services application. You can see that this is a and by the way, you can get hold of this sort of little web services test harness on the Sage CRM community. I'll mention that again in a moment. But I've been able to log on using a little test application, and I can see that there is no conflict here within the licensing. So that's a good thing to say that there's no conflict with SOAP Web Services. I'm going to step on to another aspect of development now, which is going to be, in certain circumstances, a little bit more thorny. And this is around customizations and components for systems that lack an extensibility license. Now, you'll notice here on my screen, I've got Enterprise Integration Server, and I've also got Developer. So I've got EIS and Developer. EIS in documentation terms and in common parlance is called extensibility license, and for historic reasons sometimes the developer is called the DPP license. They're interchangeable terms and they're internal jargon really. Either of these rights, the developer license or the enterprise integration server license, would allow me to create a component containing metadata changes. And I'll refer you to some of the lessons on the component, but and components can contain metadata changes and files that allow for the system to be extended or to deliver customizations from a development environment into a production environment. Now you can see that I'm able to add components on my install, and these are all components that might be delivered from or created within a development environment that I need to deliver here into my production server. But what if the situation was that my system lacks an EIS license? What then? Can I download? Can I install components? Well, the good news is if you have customers with systems that lack a developer or an extensibility license, then you can actually go ahead and know that you can install a system. Any system that contains just metadata changes will always install. And that metadata changes can include database connections, which might be to an accounting system, or another system like the payroll system. You've got as well, you might have new table connections to another external database. You might have additional tables and columns described, especially around new entities that you've added into the system, new screens, lists, all of that can be delivered, including any .NET extensions that are files that are the assemblies that contain customizations. The problem occurs with licenses and customizations with ASP pages. So ASP pages are unique in that they have issues when delivered to systems lacking developer or extensibility licenses. And this is because ASP pages use something called include files, and our include files, and I'd refer you here to the lessons that deal with customization around here, but just to flag up the need is that customizations on ASP pages make use of include files to allow for the instantiation of the correct objects within inside these classic ASP pages. So that's the Sage CRM.js file, Sage CRM nolang.js file. You can get around that by copying the files, having those files added in so that they can be copied in. But if you do lack an extensibility license, the target system lacks an extensibility license, then you'd need to ensure that you had the correct version of the include files that were needed for that system. You can get those by going to the community site, so community.sagecrm.com, and there's a download area, and you'll be able to find the DPP include files. These are the developer include files that allow ASP pages to run on any install of Sage CRM, whether or not it has an extensibility license or not. Okay, we've covered in this session, and it's been a little bit longer than normal sessions. We've covered commercial matters. We've thought through that really how licenses work are down to the choices that individual operating companies within the Sage group make and territories. We've looked at the problems that may occur after installation. We've also considered some questions about the right way of carrying an update of a license, as well as thinking about the matters around development and some of the extensibility of Sage CRM and how that impacts licensing.